don't think it's a problem because most of the girls ask for it.
How do they ask for it?
The way they act, the way they... I can't say the way they dress because that's an own personal choice. Some dumb hoe that you butt rock your bitch is walking down the street. They're asking for it and they deny it, but it's true.
Riot Grrrl was a short-lived era of immense cultural influence, sprouted from a mix of the cultivation of the punk movement, the passions of some college students, and a fair amount of feminine rage. From the 90s going forward, the complexities and levels of ingenuity behind every aspect of this subculture influenced generations, and has continued to be a driving force as a frontier behind what punk is today and the contemporary feminist movement as a whole. Punk as an idea, genre, and lifestyle has always stood for anti-conformity, a subculture that goes against the preconceived notions of what's digestible and what's acceptable for members of society. The 80s were a time of huge changes, with punk bands and lyrics of a more political nature than what 70s punk had brought to the table. Hypermasculinity dominated the punk scene, speaking against consumerism, capitalism, and inequality of all forms. The progressiveness of punk stood as a prominent message against corruption and injustice. Despite these waves of change and progress, women's issues were one thing that seemed to stay stagnant, with the same oppressive ideologies about women and female sexuality carrying over into an age where punk and the inherent defiance of societal norms was all the rage. The role of a woman in the 80s punk scene was often subordinated, reduced to the position of girlfriend and nothing more because women were often seen as too weak to hold credibility within the punk scene altogether. The Riot Grrrl movement sought to change that.
I'm Kathy.
I'm Kathleen.
Toby.
The year is 1991, Olympia, Washington. 20 or so female punk groups and singers are gathering in basements, sharing their lyrical anger and connecting at a female-ran, female-led event, dubbed Love Rock Revolution Girl Style Now, or simply Girl Night. It was the opening concert for the week-long debut of the International Pop Underground Convention. The lineup of performers included soon-to-be pioneers of the Riot Grrrl movement, including Bikini Kill, Bratmobile, Heavens to Betsy, and numerous other bands. These like-minded artists, who had really only known each other through networking or email, finally had the opportunity to relate their ideas in person. Artists connected with aspiring artists, creators of fanzines connected with inexperienced band members, and in true punk fashion, a girl riot was formed. Before Girl Night, local punk band Bikini Kill from Kathleen Hanna and Toby Vale had only recently been established. They'd been collaborating on a fanzine of the same name, which had a growing community of supportive readers. They'd been in touch with founders of Bratmobile, Molly Newman and Allison Wolfe, about their pending projects as well. But after Girl Night, the Riot Grrrl movement was well on its way. The discourse that came as a result of the 1991 Girl Night is what sparked Riot Grrrl. The convention brought feminist punk into the limelight and would continue to thrive for a decade after that. A tour between Bikini Kill and Bratmobile the following year brought Riot Grrrl to Washington, D.C., and the movement branched from there, gaining momentum across several parts of the country by 1992. However, Riot Grrrl didn't start with music as it's most commonly affiliated with, but with journalism, fanzines, or simply zines, and the means of production to the people.
With the zines, it was like really kind of ephemeral and like just of the moment, which I really loved because you could write something really immediate. It wasn't like a magazine that you have to do something 3 months in advance. It was like you had an idea, you wrote it down, you did it that night. So in a way, it's really similar to blogging.
Zines were a way to package the creativity, passions, and thoughts of women into a comprehensive booklet that could then be distributed without the worries of censorship or corporate distribution. Zines opened up discussions about various topics, including the AIDS crisis, homophobia, racism, bodily autonomy, classism, fat phobia, and other justice issues. The function of zines also worked to destigmatize the discussion of sexual assault and rape, amplifying the voices of those who had been drowned out by the male-dominated punk scene. This created a space for these women to share their stories and spread awareness about the prominence of sexual violence and domestic abuse. The capacity of these scenes may have been messy or disorganized at times, but it gave women an outlet to spread information and to connect with like-minded people in a way that hadn't really been seen before. Of course, the musical aspect of Riot Grrrl has maintained itself as the most prominent within the feminist punk scene, with charged lyrics that confronted women's issues in a powerfully blatant light. Riot Grrrl artists would often sing with a sort of satirical Valley Girl accent, mocking the mainstream depictions of feminine innocence and how a woman should act. The irony of their smeared makeup, aggressive dances, and feminine short dresses challenged cultural conditioning through radical self-expression. Performers would shout words or whole monologues of encouragement to women in the crowd, which stood in defiantly stark contrast to how women would often be treated at male punk concerts, with violating risks of assault and groping in the mosh pits. Riot Grrrl adopted the politically charged values of the punk subculture into something that was new, with an audience of feminists who wanted their voices to be heard. Oftentimes, portions of shows would be used to allow for women to share their stories, embracing a safe space of positivity on individual differences, while uplifting and reclaiming unique femininity on all levels. They were reinterpreting the punk narrative to incorporate all punks. The Riot Grrrl movement stood on ground zero for empowerment, as it manifested and embodied the anger and frustration of the lag in attention to women's issues in both politics and punk. Of course, Riot Grrrl's confrontational style produced doubtful and supportive reactions from all political viewpoints, considering its novelty and uniqueness even within punk. The movement was about making a fuss and drawing attention to important issues, not necessarily about knowing how to play the guitar perfectly. And people didn't really know what to think of that. They were bands, but they weren't just bands. They were amplifying good music and message. That radical approach drew attention, and with that attention came national media coverage.
You really had to be there. I got the opportunity to meet them, this DC-based punk foursome before the show. I was shocked at how contradictory their words and actions were.
The movement in itself was a mismatched framework of different groups, bands, and fanzines, all with their individually conceived ideas of what Riot Grrrl meant to them. To box the movement as a whole into a conformed thesis of its goals and ideologies would be to erase the purpose of the movement altogether, as a lifestyle meant to reject conformity and closed thinking. Mainstream media often misconstrued this arguably crucial detail, reducing Riot Grrrl to a group of obscene women singing in anger and doing questionable things. The truth is that it was a complex and contradictory movement. Riot Grrrl was never one thing, and it was never meant to be one thing. While there were key players, it was never a movement of hierarchy with certain women leading the parade, as the media often portrayed it. It was a community of women from every demographic, background, and cultural perspective. It was a movement that couldn't be reduced to the impact and contributions of a few pioneers. While the deficiencies of the hypermasculine punk scene of the 80s may have been easy to point out, it's equally crucial to acknowledge the shortcomings of the Riot Grrrl movement. Fighting against misogyny and educating others, while a progressive cause, is doomed to fail if intersectionality is not a consideration. Riot Grrrl was not created with the multifacetedness of misogyny and its impacts in mind, which therefore unwittingly excluded the experiences and voices of women of color from the discussion. That being said, the Riot Grrrl movement was never really made to last from its inception. Almost created by accident, it still moved to open up the conversation about misogyny and other social issues, and laid the framework for intersectionality and inclusive feminism. The internet and universal access to communication across the globe has helped kick this into high gear, allowing for education about feminism on all levels across every demographic. All in all, the Riot Grrrl movement's impact and legacy meant much more than its natural fallibility. Riot Grrrl worked to break down and destigmatize the existence of female sexuality, laughing in the face of the male-dominated punk world. From 1990 to 1997, it was a short-lived, brightly burning, and badass movement that led the frontier of feminism at the turn of the century. Its lasting influence has, despite its shortcomings, empowered generations of women and all people into embracing their femininity and social identity. Riot Grrrls weren't just performers or punk artists. They were activists foremost, as well as publishers and changemakers. This was female-centered cultural activism, manifested in a way that had never before been seen, in a way that might not ever be seen again.